Hi, I'm Chuck Braverman. This is the 200th episode of Westdoc Online. I've just returned from a 2-week vacation in Spain on a motorcycle with the Gourmet Biker Tour. I made a film there about the trip, and I'm sort of debating whether I should put it on the channel. Let me know what you think. The business of film is changing so rapidly with AI and everything else. I thought it was important that we speak to one of the real, true innovators in the film business. His name is Michael Cioni. He has a company called Strada. I think if you use the cloud, you'll want to take a look at this episode. So here we go. Enjoy.
Your Dropbox is full. Your iCloud's full. Your Google Drive's full. Frame.io is full. It doesn't matter how much you buy. You're always going to run out of cloud storage.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
It's really a pleasure. I kind of feel like I've known you for a while because I've been following you online, and I think we've said hello at NAB a couple of times. But other than that, I'm just sort of astounded by what you're doing. And before I get into Strada, let's talk a little bit about what is your background? What led you to this point here?
Well, I grew up in Chicago. I was the son of two artists. My mom was a musician. My dad was a cartoonist. And when I was a kid, I was always around the arts. And in Chicago in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of advertising. It was kind of the ad capital, right? And so there was all these great creative people really forwarding all this commercial, like cool commercials, and the Clios were represented by a lot of the talent that came from Chicagoland. And so that's where I grew up, going to post houses and concerts all the time and getting a taste of that. Then I went to Southern Illinois University, but I was in school at what turns out to be the most important time. And it actually goes to sort of something a lot of people might either be aware of or might be part of, which is this idea of a micro generation that some people call Zillennial. And so my generation was stuck between the Gen X and the millennials. And what subsequently we realized happened is when we went into college, there was no internet or cell phones. But when we entered the workforce, there was internet and cell phones. And this tiny little sliver of Gen X and millennials, which are sometimes again called Zillennials, we are the first generation to go through our entire childhood and scholastic career without the technological benefits of cell phones and internet, but the workforce had it all. Everyone older than us had a transition into internet and cell phones, and everyone younger than us experienced it in school in some way. And what was really unique for us is that in 1999, when we're in college, we got basically Final Cut Pro 1.0, the Apple G3, Firewire, and DV Cam from Sony. All of those came out basically at the same time. And it presented this whole new world where we could transfer digital video, we could shoot high quality video, transfer it to a computer and edit it on an application that was affordable, on a computer that was powerful. And we stopped using the school's equipment because the school's equipment was old and antiquated and dusty and unimpressive. And we basically, long story short, flunked out of school. All my buddies and I, we won the Student Emmys 2 years in a row. We won Kodak Student Filmmakers of the Year 2 years in a row. And we basically flunked out of school because we stopped focusing on the school stuff and started focusing on making our own projects because we got addicted to Final Cut, Firewire, DV Cam, and the Apple G3. And that paved this way for this world of what became HD and digital cinema, which became Red, which became Airy, which became, all these other things that have subsequently happened. But that is essentially where I got my first, excitement about this was in the disruption of incumbent technologies, film and traditional videotape video, and coming in and proving everyone that said this digital thing is a fad, it'll never work, nobody likes it, nobody wants it, it'll never happen. we just brute forced our way, started learning how to build businesses, started several businesses, started making movies. And in my career, I ended up working on like 175 feature films, thousands of episodes of television. And I became synonymous with the progressive act of modernizing your workflows to digital cinema, digital technologies, file-based and 4K and HDR, all that new stuff. And I just got used to being an early adopter and training my friends, colleagues, and customers how to deploy it for themselves.
Well, so when you say you worked on all these episodes and movies and everything, were you working in a post house or an editing house? I mean, what were you doing?
Yeah, I was really overseeing a lot of the post-production workflow, but I involved on set. So I was on set building mobile technologies for movies like Avatar and Pirates of the Caribbean or Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider-Man, the Muppet movie, just a lot of these great movies that were exploring how to use digital tools. Now, I owned a post house called Light Iron, which I started with my brother. That was my second startup, and we started building post houses that allowed us to kind of celebrate all the new tech, where a lot of traditional post houses at the time were focused on protecting the status quo, which was primarily a 35 millimeter Kodak infrastructure or a videotape infrastructure, which was led by Sony technologies like HD Cam and HD Cam SR. But we said, what if we don't need those tools? What if everything could be done with computers? Which sounds super obvious today, but 20 years ago, this was a radical idea. We started building SANs, storage area networks, in 2003. That's very early. I don't know that I had the first SAN in Los Angeles, but I might have, because it wasn't really used in cinema. And then we started using QuickTime movies, which today everybody uses QuickTime movies. But in 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, QuickTime and Apple weren't products and technologies and workflows that people used to make movies. And they were using videotapes and dubbing and copies and VHS and even DVD. And we said, well, we should move beyond this. These are all restrictive media. And if we go to files and hard drives, I remember one story. Do you remember when people had videotape machines? They were a $100,000 videotape machine, and you had to pay someone to clean the heads every once in a while. And we had a couple of those so that we could digitize videotape into our SAN. And I remember the guy coming to clean the heads. And he looks in the rack next to the videotape machine. He says, "What's that?" I said, "That's a SAN." He goes, "What's that?" I said, "It's a bunch of hard drives. And it's basically like having 10 HD cam decks for $100,000. I have 10 decks instead of paying $1 million for 10 HD cam decks." And I remember him saying, "That'll never work. This hard drive thing, you can't rely on that. No one will ever use hard drives for editing and post-production." And part of me was like, what if he's right? We're so screwed. He's very smart. He was very experienced. But the other part of me was like, no, he's wrong. He's protecting the status quo, and I have to learn how to resist those temptations to fall into those traps. And instead of saying he's wrong, find out where he's right and make sure that we can build a solution that solves for those problems so that it does become reliable.
Well, this may surprise you, but everything you're saying makes so much sense to me, because I remember very, very clearly first being interested in documentaries coming out of film school and owning an Arri 16 SR, I think it was, and
right.
a camera that was made in New York by a film company, like General Camera, I think, which was a custom camera, but it was 16 millimeter, and you had to buy the film, you had to process the film, you had to make a work print, you had to cut the work print, you had to hire a negative, I mean, all these things, and they cost thousands and thousands of dollars. And I remember very clearly, I was friends with an editor, Rob King, and he had bought an Avid, and I think it was like $85,000, and he was editing soccer movies on it, and I became friends with him, and we said, let's try and edit some stuff together, and we started on his Avid, and then that was exactly when this amalgamation of things happened at the same time. Final Cut Pro came out. Sony had the DV1000, I think was the first one, right, which was $2,000 or $3,000 instead of $75,000, right, for a Betacam.
That's right. And it was the BX1000, but yeah, that's right.
And Rob said to me, if you expose this VX1000, which was a little teeny camera, right? DV tape. If you expose it and shoot it properly, we could do films for networks that required a beta. What was the high-end beta? Not Betacam, the high-end.
Beta SP.
Beta. Yeah, they wanted the 75,000, 35-pound camera, right? He said, we can, blow it up to Beta XP, and they'll never know. And of course, that is why I got back into documentaries in 1999. We had Final Cut Pro 1 and Firewire and the new Final Cut, the new Apple, whatever it was, that worked with, and the box full of discs. Was it discs? I guess that installed the Final Cut 1 in there.
Yeah, they were DVDs, but yeah, that's how you. That's how we did it back then, and it changed everything, and it got me excited. The downside to this story is when I was in Illinois exploring all this stuff, we got excited to come to California, and we thought that this would be this super progressive space, an industry that would invite all this new stuff in. That's what we were expecting. California's this big progressive state. Everybody's forward thinking. And it turns out when we got here, that was totally untrue. Nobody wanted to usher in new stuff. It just felt like there was a giant keep out sign at the city limits. And all these ideas that we were really bringing to the table of digital video and digital cinema, most people rejected them. Certainly experienced people were initially rejecting them pretty hard. And so what we ended up having to do is find the independent filmmakers because they're willing to try everything. And they loved new stuff.
Well, the studios had a vested interest to protect all the hardware, all the I'm going to say chems, but the moviola, they had, hundreds of moviolas stand up. And things were being edited on upright moviolas still.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, and that's, Steve Jobs, when he came back to Apple, he always, they had to repatriate a whole bunch of this company because it got too big and out of control. And he said the best way to prepare for the future is to cannibalize your product line. He says, if you don't cannibalize yourself, someone else will. What he taught me, and what he taught a lot of smart entrepreneurs and CEOs, is that just because a business is working today doesn't mean it will work in the future. And the best way to protect yourself from that is to start cannibalizing itself before some other competitor comes along. That's a lot scarier and harder, but that's how Apple keeps innovating. They literally invent their own self out of themselves, right? They build things that make their own stuff obsolete. Here's a perfect example. The iPod, which was the flagship of the product, eventually is rendered unusable, unnecessary by iPhone. Even though that didn't happen overnight, it was a transition. The iPhone canceled the iPod. And they both came from the same company. That is so much more difficult to do than people realize. And it's a proper self-cannibalization. The companies like Moviola, like you call it the Moviola, but Moviola was a business. They owned editing. But because they didn't cannibalize themselves, they lost their own market. And it went to other groups, right? And so that's an example where we celebrate the name Moviola, but nobody uses one anymore. And they had the opportunity to build the nonlinear editor as much as anybody, but it came from, like Avid and groups like that. So it's just, I just came here thinking I'd be celebrated alongside people who wanted the new stuff, and I had to work harder to find people willing to take the risks. And then eventually the status quo comes on board. And there are a lot of people that I remember, I won't say their names because some of them are still alive, but I remember key people saying, you'll never get a reputable cinematographer to ever shoot on a digital cinema camera. And now they all do. And it's no thanks to them, right? Some of them. And so the whole opportunity is to make sure that when you say this can't be done, you're sometimes saying it to people who will it into existence. And I'm thankful for the people who, I'm not the only one, but I was with a bunch of people who cared enough about making digital cinema work that we fought every day to make the infrastructure and the tools and the technology better, equip talented people so that it became a wonderful solution for the people that chose to use it.
So now you have this new company with your brother called Strada. Do you want to give us? And by the way, I just watched the 3-minute new YouTube that you just posted, which says it all. Which maybe I'll put at the end of this episode or cut it up into pieces and tease it throughout. I don't know. But tell us what Strada is and why is it so revolutionary and why is Jeff Bezos mad at you?
Yeah, funny. I'm probably too small to be on his radar today, but that's cute. I love it. Well, the truth is, I was part of a startup called Frame.io, and along with Emery Wells and John Traver and a bunch of other talented people, we grew this business and were able to sell it to Adobe in 2021. And when we sold it to Adobe, we became part of the Adobe story. And then it wasn't a perfect fit for me. And I got some new ideas. And I just thought everything that was changing in the market and with AI and cloud, it was like, there's going to be something else. So my brother was at Netflix and I was at Adobe. And we both said, let's start over. And this is my 4th startup. And I love those early stage experiences. As brutally hard as they are, I kind of crave them. And we realized, and I was sitting at my kitchen table as we're trying to build a product, and you know how you can get your cell phone will give you notifications when your credit card's charged, right? We get that little buzz and you see the credit card. And for me, it's a American Express. And I get the Amex, and I saw the Amex bill for my LucidLink account. Now, LucidLink is this amazing product that allows you to edit remotely using cloud. So you upload files to a cloud, and then remote editors can access them. I've used it for years. I was using it. But at Frame.io and Adobe, I didn't pay for it. I don't know how much it costs. Somebody else paid for it. And what happens is editors tend to keep adding more and more material to the cloud. So your cloud storage balloons. And you start getting these messages, you got to upgrade, your Dropbox is full, your Google Cloud's full, and all these clouds get full because we're bad creatures of deleting. We don't want to delete something we might think we might need. So we just keep adding to it. And what starts as 1 or 2 terabytes quickly becomes 8 or 9 terabytes, and then that can become 10 or 20 terabytes. And all of a sudden, you're like, well, what's another terabyte? What's another terabyte? And then all of a sudden, you're paying $5, $6, $7, $800 a month for cloud storage. And I realized in this particular moment where I hit my pain tolerance for how expensive this cloud stuff is and how small my team was. And then I projected how much it's going to cost in 2 or 3 years. I'm going to be charged $2,500 or $3,000 a month based on what we're doing to use this technology. And we just said, there's got to be a better way. The cloud gets their hooks in you, and that's their business. Remember, their business is not to provide you a creative collaboration service. Their business is storage. They want you to store things. The cloud technologies that they sell you are actually not making them all the money. The money they're being generated is from the storage costs. Now, of course, it's expensive because you have to have hard drives, you have to have coolant, you have to have a building, you have to have security guards and all of that to make these data centers work. And you got to have lots of them for redundancy. And what we just simply said is that overhead can make the cost of 1 gigabyte 40 to 100 times more expensive in the cloud than a hard drive sitting on your desk. And when you have a hard drive on your desk, they can be 40 to 100 times cheaper per gigabyte than putting the same files in a cloud. And since most people have a hard drive on their desk anyway, and they upload a portion of that to the cloud, you're literally paying a huge markup for a copy of a file you already own. And so we simply said, why invite people to clouds with copies of our media at this extreme price when we could just invite them to the drive where the media lives anyway? And so Strada was born out of our own financial pain where we couldn't afford to collaborate with cloud technologies. And our accounts just ballooned so much that we either had to delete things we didn't want to, or we had to pay fees that we couldn't afford. And those were 2 bad choices. And so we ended up building Strada, which is the world's first peer-to-peer collaboration platform for creative professionals. And now you just invite people like Google Drive or like Frame.io or like any invitation security tool like Dropbox or whatever, except you don't put anything in a cloud. And you just access the files off a drive instantly. You can transfer them back and forth. You can view them. And because we have broken free of the cloud, we don't have to obey any of its rules. The cloud has tremendous limitations that are based on the physics of how cloud technology works. We don't actually have to follow some of those rules because we're able to take advantage of your computer because it's your computer and your hard drive. And that starts to unlock things that previously were impossible to even conceive of. And it's just become a sort of a new meadow, this open meadow. And I feel like we've walked beyond this dense forest of cloud that I'm trapped in, this fire swamp. And then I move into this meadow and I can breathe and I can see and I've got room and space and I can afford it and I can build here. And like that is what Strada is unlocking for people globally. And I'll tell you something really fascinating we never thought. And this is really interesting for your listeners. 60% of our users are not in North America. And the reason that's so significant is because clouds are traditionally North American inventions. Most of the companies that build clouds are not just North American, they're American, and most of them are in California. This is the wealthiest state in the United States. It's the wealthiest single state in the whole planet, right? And so what's really unique about that is the pricing of cloud is based on very Western pricing. And so it becomes really hard to tolerate in the Southern Hemisphere and in nations with lower GDPs because the cloud isn't cheaper in Indonesia. Amazon costs the same for Indonesians as it does for Californians. Well, that's a problem because the GDP is so disparate. And so what we have been able to do by leveraging people's existing infrastructure that they own, their hard drives, their computers, their internet service provider, is we don't charge for any of that. So we're giving them the accessibility that Amazon delivers, except it's their stuff. So we don't have to charge for all that overhead of cloud costs. So it works on lower GDP nations. So like 60% of our users, we have users in like Vietnam and Egypt and Taiwan and the Philippines and Indonesia and India and countries that simply tell us, their words are, we can't afford these other products. They're just too expensive. And Strada is so inexpensive. Today, you can edit remotely for $8 a month. $8 a month for a user to edit unlimited storage with this tech. That can be afforded by a larger group of the population of the planet. And so I'm just really excited that we're helping empower people beyond the borders of Los Angeles County.
So your product is basically software for Macs and PCs that they install on their computer to allow this file sharing to happen.
Yeah, it's exactly right. You install a software we call the Strada agent, and that agent allows you to connect your computer to other people in your network, and you just connect them to each other. And so when you need to read off someone else's computer, if you use a cloud, you have to have that person upload that file to a cloud. The cloud takes a percentage of that expense, and then you download it from that cloud. What Strada does is it just connects you directly to your friend, to your collaborator, and you just look at it on their computer. You see it there. You don't have to transfer it at all if you don't want. You can just access it.
What speed of internet do you need in order to see things in what I'll call, for lack of a better term, real time, decent quality?
That's where some of the value is in this. When I said we've broken the laws of cloud, what you're getting at is so exciting because we basically are able to break all the rules in that you could have horrible internet and access files that far exceed your internet bandwidth. In other words, you can play back one of the largest files in the world today is Blackmagic RAW. Blackmagic makes cameras that are 12K resolution. So these files are like 9 gigabits per second, 9,000 megabits per second. They're really, really big, multiple gigabytes per second. These are really big files. Strada can play those files back on hotel internet. I played them back on an airplane. So like 2 megabit internet. That is something a cloud simply does not do.
And it looks as if it's high-speed internet? I mean, it looks,
Yeah, it'll look great. It'll look great. Yeah, it'll look like this.
And so, all right. So here's the bottom line question, maybe an unfair question, but how the heck did you do this?
Well, how the heck does anyone do anything? They come up with new ideas. There is a theory out there that nothing new can be invented. I kind of subscribe to that theory. Like, nothing new can be invented. What an invention is the combination of things that were never assembled together that now provide a service or tool or technology that didn't previously exist. So that's now kind of what the invention is, because nobody's inventing plastic or metal or wood or glass or buttons or software, right? But they're assembling things that were never put together in a certain way, and then you get something new. That's the invention. Strada is essentially combining technologies that were never combined before. So think about this. When you have a Zoom call or a Riverside call like this, our computers are taking a little camera and it's converting that file into an H.264 or H.265 file using a hardware chip on your computer. Those hardware chips started showing up in computers post-pandemic around 2021. Now everybody has an H.265 10-bit 4K encoder chip on their computer. And then you have all this desire to make streaming, like your podcast, easier and better, like this Riverside tool, which didn't exist until it existed. What we're essentially doing is taking these high-quality video files like Blackmagic Raw or ProRes, and we're making a Zoom call with them. We're using your computer to decode that file, to encode that file, and to turn it into a stream. So when you watch it, it's like you're streaming a ProRes file to you through like Zoom, kind of. That's kind of the underlying technology. So I don't have to move a 1,000 megabit ProRes file. I've converted it through my computer's technology into a 2 megabit file that's still 4K, and I'm giving it to you over 2 megabits, and it takes 200 milliseconds, which is a blink of an eye. It travels to you at the speed of light. And so you're able to watch a ProRes file on someone else's computer, and you could be in Starbucks, and that file could be 1,000 times bigger than your internet can handle, but it looks good enough that it looks like a high-quality stream. Certainly that's good enough to edit with. In many cases, it's good enough to color correct. And so it gives you this combination of streaming technology and remote technology and local processing technology. I mean, I'll tell you, Chuck, there are a whole bunch of people out there that buy these $2,000 and $3,000 computers, and we're not using them. There's a $3,000 supercomputer on your laptop you're just using to surf the web. That's not using your computer. What Strada does is it uses your computer. It's using the decoding and the processing and the encoding to do all that, as opposed to paying a cloud service to do that. And by the way, cloud services cannot serve a file that they do not have. In other words, if your file is a ProRes file that's 1,000 megabits in a cloud, you need 1,000 megabits to play that file back, or the cloud has to process that file for you. If that cloud processes that file, there's a cost to it, right? And that cost is where it drives all those cloud products higher, where if it's just on your desktop, it's almost free. In fact, we allow people to look at any file for free. Our free plan is unlimited connect. You can connect as many ProRes files as you want. You can watch them across the globe as if they're local for free. It costs us nothing to have you use your computer, your hard drive, your internet service provider. So I give you unlimited playback of files for free because it costs me nothing, so I don't charge you for it.
So it almost sounds too good to be true, but I know it's true because I've tried it and it obviously works. But and by coincidence, yesterday or the day before, you know how you get these unsolicited emails with stories in them. And one of the stories, maybe it was from the New York Times or I don't know, the Washington Post, was something about how the people that invented these very well-known things weren't always the ones that got the credit afterwards. And they talked about, Alexander Graham Bell is credited with the telephone, but he didn't really invent it. There was a guy 50 years before that, and so on and so on and so forth. So in a year from now, or 5 or 10 years from now, is Strada going to be the default file sharing? This is asking for a prediction. Nobody knows for sure.
Yeah.
But are you worried about, Adobe or AWS or Dropbox or whomever looking at what you've done and doing their version of it?
So on the one hand, we have filed patents on this technology, so there's protection on some of our tech stack. So that's part of the story. But I think it was Zuckerberg. I can't remember if it was Zuckerberg, but he isn't the one who even propagated this, but he might have told the story. But the story goes something like this. Businesses are so busy that you could put an entire business plan of a technology like Strada or Uber or WhatsApp or whatever on Tim Cook's desk and be like, here's the whole business plan. This is another, $10 billion business that could be yours. He's like, we don't have room or space for this. It doesn't fit in our portfolio. See, what sometimes people do is they think just because Adobe exists, they can just build what other people have. But that just isn't how anything works. One, it has to make sense for their business. Two, they have to have the resources to do it. And three, they have to have the will to do it. And companies like Adobe right now, their CEO's resigning, their stock is like 60% down. It's on its way to less than $100 a share, where 3 years ago it was in the 650s. And they've been focusing so much on AI that they haven't really focused on the right ways to address their problems. They're focusing on new tools, but they're not addressing the problems with their old existing tools. And Adobe isn't a cloud company. They have the Adobe Creative Cloud, but the Adobe Creative Cloud is just a way to take your credit card information. It isn't actually a cloud service that you use like Dropbox or WeTransfer or something like that. So they're not a cloud business. If Adobe wants a cloud business, acquiring Strada makes more sense than trying to figure out how to add that in.
Well, that's my next question, if I can interrupt. How come you haven't been acquired yet? Because you have something that's very fabulous and unique.
Well, we're on a lot of people's radars, and when you're a startup, people want to keep an eye on it. And so there's people that we check in with in a lot of larger businesses that kind of identify Strada as an interesting tech. But we have to prove everything that we've been saying. And some of the stuff that we promised hadn't come out yet. But I have made good on almost every promise I've said, and most of the time relatively on schedule. So people are seeing the things that we say we're able to execute. And there's another thing, Chuck, that I think your listeners will totally understand, because when people see like AI is out there and these super cheap cameras we talked about and so on, does that make it so that your job is at risk? And what I think real professionals understand is subject matter expertise counts. See, just because you give someone an Arri Alexa doesn't mean they make a good movie. The chances are they won't make a good movie, because making a good movie is so hard. The Arri Alexa is the easy part, right? And so I actually think that subject matter expertise is such a critically overlooked thing to any business. So the Alexander Graham Bell story, yes, someone else may have invented the telephone first, but his subject matter expertise and his ability to bring it to market was better. There are lots of stories. Apple didn't invent the first MP3 player. They built the best one, and they knew how to deliver it to market better, and it fit into their ecosystem better. That's why it toppled over the Zune and other tools. Like the iPod should have been built by Sony, the Zune. It should have been better by Sony. It made more sense over there. But Apple was able to outmaneuver them, and they had more subject matter expertise for ecosystems, and they built it into an ecosystem with your computer. And that was part of the key to that. So I think part of the Strada story is we have tremendous subject matter expertise. I'm an expert in post-production and color science and workflow and cameras and lenses and, editorial. And so I know where the hardest pain points are. My friends and colleagues are filmmakers, and I know what is the most frustrating and what's the hardest, where the most anxiety is. And I've always tried to build products that lower anxiety. And Strada is the next product that I've come up with that helps lower anxiety by increasing access to people's media with less cost and less time. No uploading, no paying for cloud storage. That helps people's workflows. So I think other people will pay attention to us. I do want to say there are companies that have invested. Like we are actually raising money as a crowdfunded business. Like our users are owners of Strada. That's the other crazy thing. We're bringing to Hollywood and media and entertainment a tech company model where the actual employees and users can own a piece of the product, which is really cool. So we do crowdfunding, and it allows people to invest in Strada. And we've got hundreds of investors. Some are at $100 and others are at $100,000. And everybody's sort of in the middle there. It's amazing. And they're users and they're able to invest in the business. And Larry O'Connor, who is the owner and founder of the hard drive company OWC, is one of our largest investors. And he's an example of someone who saw this technology really serves his hard drive empire, and he invested. And so some companies invested already, others may be waiting. But we're early, Chuck. These things take time, and big companies want to see it proved out, and we'll just keep trucking along until we satisfy everybody's concerns.
Where do people go if they want to invest or if they're interested in investing in your company?
The product that we use is called WeFunder. WeFunder is an amazing crowdfunding for tech companies. It's sort of like the Kickstarter for tech companies where you actually get equity in a business. And you can see the financials. It's regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. So it is a properly managed thing. So WeFunder.com. And you just search for Strada, and that's where people can invest. And you can pay with Apple Pay. It's so cool. You can just use your Apple Pay and invest in Strada. It's made to be really easy.
How many employees do you have at Strada?
We're tiny. We are 11 people, and all my startups start with a small but mighty team. And the downside is when you only have 11 people, everyone has to be a rock star, so you have to hire only rock stars. But the upside is you are very speedy. I get on calls, and because my brother and I own the business, we can make decisions. And how many people have been in calls with people, and the decision maker is not in the room. No one even knows who the decision maker is, or it takes so many cycles to get a decision to be made. We don't have that problem. We can make decisions, and we can pivot in an instant and be like, I was wrong yesterday. We're going to do this instead. That is the benefit of being a startup, and I can literally walk over there on the other side of this wall and just tell people, this is the priority, I want you to work on this. And they just will. And I don't have to deal with anything else. It's just instant action. So those are some of the benefits of being small. We are an in-person company. I think that 5 or 10 years from now, the studies will show companies that went fully remote, not all companies, it depends, but companies that went fully remote, many of them will regret it. And you will see A and B comparisons between companies that do similar services, some remote, the other in person. You'll see positive buoyancy to the in-person businesses compared to like our similar businesses that are remote. Again, that's not unilaterally accurate. There are businesses that can be even more efficient remotely, but some will suffer. And when you're building and inventing the way we are, being in person every day has tremendous advantages, and it's actually allowing us to accelerate even more. We spent the first 2.5 years in my house in North Hollywood, and we just had 11 people working at my dining room table. I have the pictures and video to prove it. And then about 6 months ago, we moved into an office in Hollywood on Cahuenga and Santa Monica at the TV Center. We love this building. It's the old original Technicolor lab from 1915. And there's like old everything here. It's very old, very cool. And we love being part of the history in this building and bringing the most modern tech to cinema in a building that was designed for the oldest, first tech of cinema.
Well, Michael Cioni, I think you're pretty amazing. I think the company you've got here is fantastic, and I wish you the best of luck. And thank you very much.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And if people want to check us out, strada.tech is where you can find us trying to help make this world a little bit easier in terms of workflow.